Hello, and I hope this message finds you well. I'm going to do something today that I was inspired to do by my friend Kyle Hilding. He runs a YouTube channel called The Spiritual Download, and I'll put a link to his channel in the description here. So if you haven't heard about it, you can check him out there. But a couple of times I've seen Kyle just read favorite passages from literature on his channel. And I think that's a powerful thing to do and a really nice way to just share works that touch us and that we love. So I'm going to do the same today. And I'm going to read a passage from this book by David Hawkins, which is called Letting Go, the Pathway of Surrender. This book is literally my favorite book of all time, which is kind of a bold statement for me because I'm a big reader. I've read a lot. This book makes an audacious claim in the preface, which is that it will transform your life and consciousness merely by reading it. And I've found that to be the case. This book is a vehicle for an expansion of consciousness, which afterward makes peace and love play greater roles in our lives, at the very least. It makes us more aware of these highly pleasurable, highly enjoyable emotional states as the basis of all things. So I highly recommend reading this book if you never have. You might listen to it on tape while driving, you might share it with a friend. And I'm going to share a passage from this book, which is toward the end. The way the book is structured is David Hawkins goes, well, first of all, he presents the idea that emotions are structured somewhat linearly. They correspond with frequencies, and there are lower frequencies or lower states of being, which are more dense and more painful. In other words, they produce greater suffering. And then there are higher frequency states of being, which are more enjoyable, more peaceful, and lighter. We have kind of an exuberance. And Hawkins's thesis is that through letting go of not only emotions, but even more basically than that, of sensations in the body, we can proceed up this emotional ladder, this emotional chain, and more greatly acquaint ourselves with love and then ultimately peace, peace being the highest frequency emotional state. And so what I'm going to read is from the peace chapter. And basically in this chapter, after discovering meditation, after discovering a sense of spirituality late in his life, David Hawkins has isolated himself in a cabin. He's a psychotherapist. He's rented out a cabin purely for the purpose of meditation. And through meditation, he's going to try to transcend the ego, which is, a very high aspiration. He's going to try to attain ultimate peace or enlightenment. And at first, or after a great length of trying, actually, the doubt arises that he's not going to be able to do this. It's impossible. And then he goes to a local cafe in this small area where he's rented the cabin, and suddenly a transformation occurs, a total transformation of his state of consciousness. And this state of absolute peace is reached. And so I'm going to read Hawkins's description of this emotional state. And yeah, I think I'll have time. I have something to do in a little bit, but with time, I'll discuss some of the principles being expressed here and how and why they strike me. So yeah, I'll just read these couple pages and then I'll discuss. It seemed very strange that one could previously have thought that one was an isolated body separate from others, with a limited beginning and a finite ending. The thought seemed absurd. There was no longer any feeling of a separate self, and the pronoun I disappeared and became meaningless. Instead, there was the awareness of being all things. It had always been and always would be. True beingness stood outside of time. The period of time that the body had been on earth seemed like a split second during which the truth of timeless identity had been forgotten, due to being blinded by the smaller self. Then how it had happened revealed itself. There had been a wishful thought to experience separate existence, and this wishful thought had manifested itself as the individual person with an individual identity and a physical body to go with it. I want to pause here actually, and maybe I'll just discuss each of these paragraphs in isolation because they so effectively condense rich spiritual traditions and ideas into David Hawkins's concrete experience of these attributes or these ideas. So here, upon his reacquaintance with, his immersion in the grand awareness, the absolute, the all, it seems ridiculous that ever there was a time where he thought he was nothing more than his body, nothing more than his physical self with its limited duration on earth. Then there's an investigation. Well, if it's so ridiculous, if it's such a vast and obvious error to think in this way, then why did it happen? And he realizes that there was a desire from the all, from the absolute, to experience separation. What David Hawkins is really doing in these sentences, and not through any kind of analysis or conjecture, but through pure experience, is providing a rationale for existence, which is the absolute consciousness, the singular energy that pervades the universe, has decided to break up into individuals in order to experience itself, in order to achieve self-consciousness. He's providing here a purpose for our existence. I'll go on. The interconnectedness of all things was starkly obvious. It was the holographic universe as described by the Buddha and by modern advanced theoretical physics, both of whom agree as to the intrinsic nature of the universe. Because everything was perfect, there was nothing to wish for, nothing to desire, nothing to create, and nothing to become. There was only that, the very essence of beingness out of which existence arises. That beingness is the source of existence, yet curiously not its cause. He's referring here to a very old and well-established concept in Buddhism, which is that of the void, the pure nothingness out of which all things paradoxically arise. And as he says here, this concept converges with the findings of the latest in theoretical physics. For instance, if you've ever looked into the work of David Bohm talks about nothingness, talks about the void, not as emptiness in the sense of purely the negation of matter, but rather as infinite potential. Because it is nothing, paradoxically, it can become anything. And so, in a sense, only nothingness contains the absolute possibility of the universe. This felt experience for David Hawkins coincides with many interpretations of God. God is this infinite potential out of which all things arise. And not just once, not just in the Big Bang, but in every moment that we experience. There was a profound familiarity to the awareness. It was as though one had always known it, as if one were home at last. There were no emotions or feelings. There was an unawareness of sensations. Even though they seemed to go on, they were no longer personal or of concern. Pause there just to say, Hawkins is now experiencing himself as sort of a character in a story, experiencing himself in the third person. Yes, there are thoughts, there are feelings, there are sensations, there are actions. There is even the story of our lives, challenges we're seeking to overcome, relationships we're having, all of these things. But these can be experienced, and in this moment for Hawkins, they are experienced as from upon this great perch, which is the vantage of God, which sees all beings as equivalent and does not isolate any as special or as particular. Hawkins himself becomes just more matter expressing itself in the universe. By way of experimentation, a thought was held for a split second to see what would happen. Almost instantly, there was an effect in the physical world. The thought of butter or coffee, for instance, resulted in the waiters coming over immediately with the items, and yet no word had been spoken. No word seemed necessary. Communication occurred with anyone on a level of silence. Now, here in particular, I wanted to pause because what Hawkins is describing is what we tend to think of as magic or manifestation. But he's describing how it actually works. We often think of it in this false individualistic sense, which carries with it a notion of control. I can write in my diary, I want to have a car, I want to be rich, I want to win the lottery, I want to, have a beautiful spouse, whatever. And if we do this enough, we'll kind of make it happen, force it to happen through this kind of magic or spell casting. And that is a thing we can do in this universe. It does work like that. It's like writing the code in The Matrix, if you've seen that film. However, what Hawkins is experiencing here is the magic of pure being. He is seeing that beneath the level of his personhood, who wants the butter, and the waiter who brings over the butter, there is this fundamental nothingness, this infinite potentiality, this sameness, out of which both his desire and the waiter satisfying that desire arise. So rather than manifestation, what he is experiencing is synchronicity. He is experiencing the seamless flow of his desire and the universe meeting that desire, for these two events have a common cause. They have a common cause in this substrate of divine and absolute unity. I'm going to have to stop in a moment, so I'll just read this last paragraph and maybe say a few words about that as well. The body drove the car to a meeting that evening where no one noticed anything different. Everyone seemed to be intensely alive. Their aliveness shone forth from their beingness, and the self, which was the same for all, shone forth through their eyes. The body spoke to others, spontaneously carrying on normal conversations and behaving in its usual way. At the time, the body seemed like a karmic wind-up toy run by all of its accustomed patterns and programs, not needing any attention in the slightest. It seemed to know what to do and did it very effectively and effortlessly. All conversations and interactions were merely witnessed as phenomena, not directed. It seemed like a strange vanity to have once believed that there had been a small self as the author of the body's actions. In reality, the body was at the effect of the universe, and there had never been a doer of its actions. Phenomena were as vibrations of the mind that had no separate existence or reality. There was allness only. Only that oneness actually existed. Now, Hawkins touches here on two realizations that I think are very important byproducts of a spiritual epiphany, and that I've talked about in some of my videos and interviews and so forth. One is a sense of flow. He here is proceeding through his life effortlessly and without a sensation of needing to do anything. I recently put out a video called Confidence's True Source, and I talk about this sensation of flow as the hallmark of confidence. And as with Hawkins's experience here, ultimately that sensation must come from a grander perspective, from disidentification with the body, and instead identification with something which does not change. In Hawkins's writing, it's this absolute understanding of the universe as this energy and as this cosmic co-arising from nothing. What's the second sensation? Or second takeaway I wanted to discuss? Oh, the notion of free will also disappears here for Hawkins. Rather than believing himself to be the executor of his actions, he sees now that the entire apparatus of his self, body, mind, thoughts, feelings, are conditioned by the universe and are rather like dominoes being set off in a chain by that universe. The individual self will fight very hard to believe in the notion of free will. It is one of the last bastions, one of the last strongholds of the ego. But from this greater perspective, this absolute peace with which Hawkins is in touch, free will becomes irrelevant because the nature of the universe reveals itself as benevolent, as good, as loving. And so why not be in its flow? One has no other choice anyway, but the ultimate trajectory of the universe is accepted, is surrendered to. So all of this is portrayed in those literally 2 pages by Hawkins in this wonderful book. So I wanted to share that with you. The last thing I want to say here is that reading those pages in particular at times can be deeply emotional for me. He talks about how this sensation is like coming home at last. He had been in a strange land his whole life, and the strange land was his self, the physical body. And he's now returning to this greater field, which is his birthright, his true home. And sometimes when I read these passages, I feel both profound love, gratitude, and peace in recognition of my own return to that land, and also longing and sadness for my separation from it, which still comes and goes in time. So yeah, I just wanted to share that this can be a very emotional piece of writing for me as well. So thank you for listening, and if you have any questions or thoughts after hearing these words and my interpretations of them, you are free to contact me either here or on my website, which is jacksonholtzbergbuckley.com, or Facebook. So thank you again and have a blessed day. Goodbye.